Between the base game and the DLC, Elden Ring has a vast variety of regions to explore and bosses within said regions. But if I were to split the game into those pieces, which boss from each region would be considered the worst? I'm Billy S, and today I'm answering that exact question. What is my least favourite boss from each region in Elden Ring, including the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC? So, let's jump right in with... There are 32 bosses throughout Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula, but there's one boss who is the clear worst in roster. Not for any negative reason, mind you, as the Soldier of Godric, the tutorial boss of the Cave of Knowledge, is an icon in the community. This brave man knows he's absolutely screwed the moment he approaches you, and yet he was never forgotten. The concept of running into him in a boss randomizer in a late game arena brings me so much joy. Not for the easy fight, but for the glow up he could potentially have. However, if you really don't want to include the tutorial boss as the worst out of pity, I'd have to give it to the Stone Digger Troll found in the Limgrave tunnels. To put it bluntly, I've never been the biggest fan of enemies who can cause your attacks to bounce back depending on weapon damage type and their hardness stat. It's just a feedback the game gives that feels incredibly unsatisfying. Then the boss is just an enemy type that is found throughout Limgrave. To the west of the starting grave on the path down to the beach, there's the one that drops on you when heading up to Stormhill. If you do any exploring before heading to this dungeon, you'll have fought one of these guys already. And his raw medallion is useful for certain build types, but I've personally never worked it into mine, making him inherently skippable in most cases. Soldier of Godric or the Stone Digger Troll, those are my picks for Limgrave. You let me know which one you think should be selected down below. There are 28 bosses throughout Liurnia, and while the Royal Revenant found in the ruins before Caria Manor was a close runner-up for this spot, because who doesn't despise a Royal Revenant, there's one boss who gave me an unforgettable experience that I wish I could forget. The Cemetery Shade found at the end of the Black Knife Catacombs. These speedy creatures don't have a lot of health, so with the right build, you shouldn't have too much trouble taking them down. But what they lack in HP, they make up for in being fucking annoying. They teleport because walking is overrated. They have the ability to fire a green attack that holds you in place so they can grab attack you, and they can hit you with brutal flails that can be tough to manage and provides bleed build-up. But this fight adds in skeleton minions you also need to manage. Cemetery Shades are already annoying as fuck. Did they need a party of bone men to make my life even more miserable? Skellies are already irritating due to their ability to revive after a short period unless their bone piles are struck, but I've got no time to do that when Mr. Shade is breathing down my neck. This boss matched Margit and Starscourge Radahn in terms of the attempts it took me to kill. Moog was easier than the Cemetery Shade. That's messed up. There are 14 bosses throughout Caelid, and would you believe me if I said my least favourite fight was, again, another fucking Cemetery Shade? You find this guy in the Caelid Catacombs, but at least he's on his own this time. The main difference between this shade and the ones fought in Limgrave and Liurnia is the slightly increased pool of health. The boss will survive for longer, meaning more opportunities to bleed build up and take you out, which, honestly, I don't actually mind. Of the 3 Cemetery Shades in the game, this is probably my favourite boss encounter. It's just in a region where I think the overall boss quality is a tad higher than the previous 2. If we didn't want to be repetitive though, I can throw the gank against the Mad Pumpkinheads into the ring. I quite like this fight for what it is, but facing 2 Pumpkinheads can be a little stupid when you're bouncing your attacks off their impenetrable heads over and over. They both wield different weapons though, a hammer and a flail, which is pretty cool, and they guard one of the most iconic Elden Ring equipment pieces, the Visage Shield. My partner used this bad boy all the way through Shadow of the Erdtree with no regrets. So yeah, 2 entries of the Cemetery Shade. Luckily that's it for them and we can move on to more sinister pastures. There are 12 bosses found throughout Dragon Barrow, but there was no doubt in my mind that my least favourite are the Cleanrot Knight duo found in the Abandoned Cave. The bosses themselves are your usual Cleanrot Knights, enemies I quite enjoy fighting, but given how early in the game you can encounter this boss fight, and how they drop the Gold Scarab Talisman as a reward which boosts your rune acquisition by 20%, it makes you encouraged to come deal with them ASAP. Ignore my footage though, I actually fought them quite late into the recorded run. They're the first boss in this list where I have to factor their connected dungeon though, as caves aren't like catacombs where the boss door is placed at the start. With caves, you have to memorize your way through every single time you die to a boss, and the abandoned cave is Rot Pool Central, one of the most annoying caverns in the game to explore. If I did a cave ranking, it'd be dead last. You can't avoid Scarlet Rot here, which is just so obnoxious to deal with. So you're worn down by the time you reach the bosses, who gank you with a mix of melee and ranged attacks that deal massive damage, and their grabs can also Scarlet Rot you instantly, which is effectively a game over unless you're in an endgame build. The rest of Dragon Barrow is filled with challenging encounters or unique fights, whereas the Clean Rot duo are there to remind you that this is a Miyazaki game, and no matter where you go, you're not escaping the poison swamps. Mount Gelmir has 10 bosses throughout the region, and this is again one of my easiest decisions, because this is a boss that made it into my worst fights in all of Elden Ring video. It's the Magma Worm in the lower lava pools. I like magma worms in Elden Ring, they're fun, they hit hard but have a lot of openings, some of them get on their hind legs mid-fight to transition to a new moveset, but it's very important that they have a working arena that doesn't hinder your fight. This magma worm, meanwhile, will spend more time out on the lava than he actually does fighting you, and when he's on dry land he'll spew magma all around him to make it even more difficult to move around and hit. He also smacks you hard for his placement in the game, making this magma worm a real tough cookie. It's an optional world boss, but given the nature of this video, the implication is that I'm going to fight every boss when I encounter them, and yet in most playthroughs, this is one of the few encounters I will always choose to skip. It's just not worth the hassle, especially when the boss gets locked into a series of charge attacks that end with the boss chilling in the middle of the lava pool and you're at the edge going, what the fuck? Do you understand how much I hate this boss to not put the Kindred of Rot duo from Seathwater Cave on this list? I despise those two, but Magma Worm being above them that made it onto this list, that should say it all, really. Altus Plateau has 20 bosses throughout the region, and Wormface is my least favourite. No preamble, let's just rip the bandage off, because any boss that messes around with Deathblight is immediately gonna get shit from me. I don't mind bosses that use status effects in their battles. I think a game like First Berserker Kazan weaved them in quite beautifully, but I don't feel there's a place for instant death status effects in boss fights, and Deathblight builds up so quickly by the time you fight Wormface that you might be thinking, is this even possible to do? With his lanky legs, his dangerous grab attack, and the other smaller enemies dotted throughout the forest, this is another of those fights I would personally skip on a next playthrough, even if that does mean missing out on 2 fairly good crystal tears for the Wondrous Physic. I will give Wormface props for ramping up the tension. I can't deny that he's a threatening boss, and the fear of instant death makes every move count during the battle, but it's really not my cup of tea, and has pissed me and my partner off on multiple occasions. That one Stone Digger troll in the Altus tunnels is lucky Wormface is here, otherwise I'd be shitting on both Stone Digger trolls in this video. The Underground has 12 bosses throughout their 4 regions: Shifra River, Ainsel River, Deeproot Depths, and Mogwin Palace. I've combined them all because solo, there just aren't enough bosses per area to make this list interesting, but together, well, I've bitched about him before, I'm bitching about him again. The Dragonkin Soldier in the Lake of Rot is the worst fight in Elden Ring, in one of the most annoying arenas in one of the most disgusting areas. Rot will afflict you. You will die multiple times. This soldier hits hard, he constantly knocks you off the raised platforms and into the goop, he has a surprisingly tanky amount of HP, and his attacks are so wide and sweeping that you just don't have the space to deal with him on such small platforms. Everything about this guy is designed to piss me off, with the only saving grace being the Stake of Marika that allows me to respawn at a moment's notice after each death. And I've brought this up in the past, but the only reason you'll want to kill this boss is for the katana it drops, which deals a higher percentage of damage against dragons. But it also deals primarily slash damage as its main output, which dragons are resistant to. And it's the only katana to not have a status effect that builds up when attacking. No bleed, no poison. Dragonkin Soldier of Rot, you just feel like a really cruel joke. Lanedale has 15 bosses throughout both variants, regular and Ashen, though as per my video I did on the topic a few years ago, I consider Lanedale to begin when you get past the 2 tree sentinels and enter the capital outskirts, up to the start of the Forbidden Lands. With that in mind, the worst Lanedale boss has to go to the Deathbird in the capital outskirts. There are 4 Deathbirds found within the game, with the majority of them faced in Limgrave and Liurnia. Unlike the rest of the fights so far, the Deathbird really doesn't do anything wrong, it's simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. When you get to Lanedale, your damage output is nice and stacked, and a simple Deathbird just can't compete at this level. It's not a challenging fight, and you can tear through its health bar like simple paper. There's just nothing unique to help it stand out. The Deathrite birds that you find in the mountaintops and in Caelid are just much cooler. The mountaintops of the Giants have 14 bosses throughout, which will include Crumbling Faramazula, as it is a legacy dungeon you access via the end of the area, and because of that distinction, it makes this entry very simple. How funny though that my 2 least favourite encounters in the mountaintops are fights against the Godskins. The Spirit Caller Snail was my runner-up, having you face an Apostle, then a Noble, and lastly the Snail itself in a Battle Royale. A cute idea, but the presence of the Godskins feels so random and felt like an excuse made so they could give out the Swaddling Cloth Talisman as a reward. But with Faramazula in the mix, what's worse than fighting the Godskins apart? Fighting them together. The Godskin duo will never beat the Allegations for me. They are my least favourite fight in the mountaintops, and I will die on that hill. They don't complement each other's movesets, they aggro far too easily, and they have a rough damage output due to being an endgame encounter. The mechanic of them respawning until the boss bar is depleted is stupid, and dare I say it, kinda lazy by the devs. And the fact that the best strategy for this fight is just to use sleep pots to knock one of them out while you focus on the other isn't very satisfying at this point in the game. I don't mind a little crafty stratagem or two, but this is a little further than that. This is just circumventing the fight's challenge because the difficulty it presented was too much for a lot of casual players. It extra irritates me too because the Godskin Apostle is one of my favourite fights in the entire game when fought solo, but they keep shoehorning him into these boss gauntlets and I need them to stop. The Consecrated Snowfield has 10 bosses throughout, none of which are awful, but a couple of which left a little to be desired. The boss that disappointed me the most though was the Putrid Avatar found at the area's minor Erd Tree. I understand why it's here. We're so close to the Halig Tree that Malenia's rotting influence affects the lands around it. But given this is likely the last minor Erd Tree players will visit in the game, I was expecting a bit more than a challenge I'd already faced multiple times in Caelid and Dragon Barrow. The Erd Tree Avatar in the mountaintops had a clone mechanic. Had the Putrid Avatar here just done the same thing, I'd probably be clapping my hands and throwing Great Worm Theodorix under the bus instead. But no, this Putrid Avatar just does nothing out of the ordinary, it's a standard fight. And in an area where there are no more standard fights, where the difficulty ramps up due to it being hidden off the beaten path, I just find myself a little bit let down by a simple Putrid Avatar. Even more so when you reach Elphael and there are multiple Putrid Avatars there as regular enemies. And now we move on to the DLC, which I've split into 4 distinct regions. Gravesite Plain, which I've also included the rivers leading up and down the region towards the north and south of the map. Shadow Altus, which includes the Shadow Keep, and Rao Base, as both areas are connected to and require you to first be in Shadow Altus to reach them. Then we have the Post-Shadow Keep, which is for areas connected to the Shadow Keep, such as the Ancient Ruins of Rao, Enir Elim, the 2 paths from the back of the keep leading to the Hinterlands and Commander Gaius, and the path leading to the Abyssal Woods. Lastly, we have the south of the map, which contains the Jagged Peak, Charo's Hidden Grave, the Cerulean Coast, and the Stone Coffin Fissure. In my head, splitting the DLC like this makes a lot of sense, and if you're enjoying this video, consider parrying that subscribe button. We're getting so close to 50,000, and you genuinely, I seriously mean it, you would genuinely be helping the channel out if you did so. You can also hype the video apparently, so let's jump into the DLC with... For Gravesite Plain, my vote for least favourite boss goes to the Chief Blood Fiend found at the end of the Rivermouth Cave. For the most part, Shadow of the Erdtree's bosses are relatively well designed, so by no means is this indicative of this fight being bad. On the contrary, I think the run-up to this fight is iconic, with the drop into the Lake of Blood and the tens of blood fiends in the room before the boss, but the actual fight isn't very difficult. He wields a large club and swings it around with gusto. Most of his moveset involves heavy jumps and slams that you need to avoid, but if you're this far into Elden Ring, his moveset shouldn't pose a threat, even when he breaks out Mohg's Bloodflame Slash. He's aggressive, but it's nothing you haven't faced before, and because he doesn't bring much new to the table, I can't not rank him in this spot. For Shadow Altus, my vote actually goes to my least favourite boss from Shadow of the Erdtree's main boss roster, Count Emir, Mother of Fingers. An NPC who goes rogue after we slay Meta, he spends most of the fight teleporting away from you while you close in and give him the 1-2 smackdown. Does it suck that to fight him you first have to beat the Sword Hand of Night Yolan invasion? Yes, because Yolan is sick and killing her is a loss to this world. All for this man and his ability to birth finger creepers, which should be a banned practice because what the ever-loving fuck? He also has those new homing spells that the creatures at the Finger Ruins use to snipe you with, Glintstone Nails, which has a truly evil level of tracking if you're not careful, and he can explode with fingers around him if you get too close. Luckily, Emir staggers easily, and his frail nature means his fight won't last forever. Just stack a bit of magic resistance and tear on through him. For post-Shadowkeep, I had a few options. I was tempted to go with the Divine Beast Dancing Lion refight for its pure goal to include Deathblight as one of the new elements. I also considered Rakshasa, because I think that boss having the poise of gods and the stagger potential of Dante from Devil May Cry is bloody disgusting. But ultimately, I think Jori, Elder Inquisitor, still takes my vote for this region as my least favourite boss. The Guardian of the Abyssal Woods, he spends most of his time teleporting around the room, summoning the spirits of past Inquisitors to attack you. Then he'll spam Golden Arcs, or Spira, or both, which make me want to McLose it at the best of times. He can get you caught in a combo quicker than you can say Maidenless, and I still haven't figured out a surefire way to deal with him that doesn't involve a bit of luck and a lot of tanking. I have a genuine fear of this boss in case I ever do an Elden Ring randomizer, because the last thing I want is Jori showing up for a required fight. It might actually make me sweat. With some tweaks, this fight could be a lot more balanced for the player and the boss, but at the moment it skews towards Jori being an obnoxious clown who can spam attacks while you get stomped by one of his big boy summons. And finally, for the south of the map, it was a two-horse race between the Deathrite Bird of Charo's Hidden Grave, for its devilishly high DPS, and the fact that there are birds constantly getting in the way of the fight with every attempt, and my actual pick for this spot, Ancient Dragon Senesax. We've all had the same experience of rocking up to this dragon thinking it'll be an easy encounter, only to get our asses clapped by the water sunken into the arena, which conducts the boss's various electric attacks. This is a cute idea for a challenge, but in practice, the fight ends up far too hectic as a result, with Senesax's lightning having no rhyme or reason. Doing drive-bys with Torrent was my only real strategy, which can be extremely tedious and time-consuming. But then every hit from the boss is basically a 2-hit Torrent KO, and if you get knocked off the horse, the stagger time will give Senesax ample time to finish you off. There's no way to really take risks here. Also, nobody was asking for another Ancient Dragon fight. We have Bale, one of the best fights in the franchise, just a few minutes up the mountain. We could have done without this roadblock, and thank God you can skip it. I never want to see another AoE again, which is a shame because every single attack from this boss is an AoE that conducts and kills. When Shadow of the Erdtree first came out, every boss was getting posts about how bullshit they were, and I knew we'd have to wait a little while to figure out which cases were just about getting good, and which were actually just badly designed boss fights. And 2 years later, Senesax is a badly designed boss fight, and one of my least favourite bosses in all of Soulsborne, let alone Elden Ring. Adios.